Dr. Megid, would you like to comment now? I'd like to thank all of the commentators and Dr. Huda for her presentation. Here, I'm not trying to go word for word because of the different and various details that were raised. First, the governing point for the production of an index are various. I'm not going to talk about the global experiments in the measurement of the social justice indicators, but I believe that I should focus on the gaps that exist here, which would shed light on the priorities for the state. When we look at the corruption indicator, there are different indices across the world, according to some of them, Egypt ranks 112, for example, and we've been moving very slowly. So I have this solid belief that international indicators should be accompanied by national ones that would deconstruct this phenomenon in a national context. Such indicators guide the public policies. I just wanted to address the ECS and Huda's comments. I believe that this indicator needs to be completed with different aspects or different domains. But I was really careful to choose the indicators that could be measured vertically and horizontally. The external debt is very important, but I will not be able to measure the external debt from a gender perspective. So this point could be treated as a supplementary component and not a different aspect or a different item under the indicator. And there are other domains that could not be also measured from a gender perspective because it has more to do with the geographical difference. So how these variables could be aggregated but not measured in manners so that the whole column would look similar. Also, with regards to weight, it's critical, but when I saw the results that Huda produced, I noticed that the difference was not major. We have to take into consideration the statistical analysis of the weights so that to be able to calculate the ideal weights or to solicit the help of an external group so that they can assign different weights or specific weights, and then we can take the average as guidance. But we need statistical analysis because if I arbitrarily assign a weight that is 3 times to the generational gaps and do not change the other gaps, that could actually guide the results. Also, Dr. Raja Asad made a very important proposals. These rows and columns are perceived dependently and independently. The independent ones are the results and the dependent are the gaps. So if I can use a variable as dependent and independent, so logically speaking, the income would differ from the Q1 and Q5. This is automatically. When I was working on the data, I believe that we should not look only at the face value of the figure, because we do a lot of calculations and multiplications, but at the end of the day, the relevant weight would tell us that the gap between the rich and the poor is more important than the gender one. This is how I perceive it. I do not take it as an exact measurement or calculation, because it's a very fuzzy phenomenon. The other point, and I'm trying to be as precise as possible because I wanted to listen to your feedback. The political freedom is critical and essential, but when producing an indicator, should take into account that the source of the data, whether it's available or not, accessible or not. When I saw the census, the new census, it made me reconsider sanitation, because it includes a lot of details, even on a governorate level, not only the rural and urban. Next point, if we are talking about the model in other papers that we did not mention, there are explanations of the model and the different stages and how to transition from one to another. This could have provided more insight for you. There are also some points that I believe as critical, such as housing. Dr. Rogi and Dr. Henya both also raise a point of transportation, commute and housing. They also freedom, political freedom is very important as well, but it's hard to measure. And also, and mobility is it could be controversial, but housing could be included. Objective and subjective perspectives, I would differ with Dr. Rogi in concluding that it would fire back. If I ask someone about the quality and whether they are satisfied with the quality of education or health services provided to them, usually those who receive the poorest quality of services are the most satisfied, because their exposure to life is what they depend on to judge. However, those who send their schools to international schools are paying thousands of Egyptian pounds for their education, believe otherwise. And when we come to sense of security, I believe the sense of security is more important than security itself. Security could be measured by the rate of crime. The lack, the sense of insecurity for women who live in places, it could affect their sense of security. So I believe the sense of security reflects other aspects that would not be obvious otherwise. Also, when you talk about enrollment to top schools, such as in engineering or the medical school, and I'm going to quote you on that. When Dr. Raghi analyzed this part, he said that one could have access to one of the top schools, but they refrain from enrollment because the actual cost of the tuition fees and the books would be higher. So it is available it is accessible. Legally, there are lots of things that are legally accessible in Egypt. That's why I try to focus on or to zoom in on the reality rather on reality. I'm going to stop here, but I would like to thank all of you. Thank you for your comments. They have been really valuable. Now, question from the audience.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Ali Sliman, former Undersecretary of the Ministry of Higher Education. I'd like to thank the Center for conducting this important seminar. I'd like to thank Dr. Meghed Osman for his attempt, the way he called it, attempted to measure the status of social justice in Egypt. It's really important, and the data availability is really few. We had a similar study on the relation between children, whether they are healthy or stunted, and the reflection of this in the public budget, and I couldn't find enough data to conduct the study. I will cut a long story short. I thank Dr. Meghed, and I'd like to nominate him as a Minister of Social Solidarity instead of the Minister of ICT. And he refers to the difference between the political discourse and the actions on the ground. The president and the ministers support the concept, but in real ground you would find something completely different. As for the tax policy, we are the lowest country when it comes to income tax. It's 6% of the GDP. And in other countries it's 14%, 25%, and 37%. So we do not collect taxes. How can we fund schools, hospitals, and so on? So the discourse is really attractive, but the actions are not that much. Also, we have 3 income generating activities. The highest income generating activities do not pay taxes. Real estate and debt interest, especially banks, and the stock market profits don't pay tax as well. So they pay 0, though they grow really hard. So education and tax could solve some of the social justice problems, and Dr. Meghed spoke of education. As for unemployment, it decreased to 12%, but I believe that the real numbers might amount to 45%. I thank the center for shedding the light on such important topic, and I thank Hoda for including the debt. But there is another indicator, the personal debt, and it's really going high. The premiums or the installments, or the women imprisoned because they couldn't pay back the loans or the notes they signed. So we should discuss this, as this is a major source of concern in developed countries, not to say developing countries. We are a satisfied society because we are a religious society, and because there is a kind of social solidarity. People pay alms. We have religious feasts to feed people in Ramadan. So this would differ in measuring in European countries, and the civil society should play a role in social justice when it comes to education and health. We have many charity schools, charity hospitals. We have free education, and the Ministry of Endowments used to provide some services, but the civil society faces some suspicions from certain institutions. I cannot change the activity unless I notify the ministry, otherwise I'd be subject to imprisonment. So they really face tough conditions. Thank you so much, and thank you, Dr. Sohair Konsoa, for her great work in human development.
Mr. Abdelhamid Kamal, I'd like to thank Dr. Megit, the ECES, and all the speakers, Dr. Rogi, and Ms. Hoda, because your presentation was really good. I would like to say that this is the actual indicator. This is the bottom line. No matter the legislations or the national projects, if we do not have any impact on the people's lives, it is completely futile. So I would like to thank Dr. Megit for all of Basira's work. And in this respect, when we are developing these indicators measuring social justice, I cannot talk about education and leaving out job opportunities, because job opportunities are closely tied to education, because the graduates, the AUC graduates, for example, and the graduates of private schools are looking for different kinds of jobs. 63% of young people make up this society, but they suffer from the high unemployment rate. There is also discrepancy between the investment, public sector, and private sector, and the other association, which reflect inequality or injustice. The other point that would be very hard to measure, I as a legislator would like to ask, does legislation in Egypt reflect justice? Well, I try as much as possible, along with my colleagues, to address this problem. Yesterday we were talking about a very important transportation legislation. While we know those who breach and those who undertake these violations, so transportation is critical, and it needs a solid indicator to measure. But can we, when we talk about the imprisonment of peasants, yes, this is very classist. So this classist measurement is really revealing. Last point here, Dr. Sohair.
Thank you. I just want to say that social capital, as you refer to trade unions, should include the institutional wealth. As for judicial wealth, administrative wealth, or available resources, do their duties or not. As for the intergenerational gap, if I don't care for the elderly, I am increasing the burden on the young, because they have to take care of the elderly. Also, on environment, we don't take care of the wasted resources. As for the beaches, some beaches are locked, are landlocked, so some cannot access these beaches. As for wasting our heritage, our cultural heritage, This, of course, deprives the coming generations of their right. So we should track the priorities of the state and see what is being taken care of and what's being left out. Last comment, because of time constraints. I have a comment and a question. Thank you so much, Dr. Megid, for your initiative. Is this a government-sponsored initiative, or is it your own idea or Basira initiative, or is this a joint effort? Will the state indicate? It has nothing to do with the government, and this should be indicated. And of course, this depends on the expenditure and consumption report in 2015, right? So we issue this on 2018 based on 2015 report. So maybe if we measure this after the Egyptian pound flotation, numbers would drastically differ. So here, this takes us to the problem of the availability of data. I'm sorry. I apologize, but these numbers are not logical, at least to me. Can we take into consideration the distribution or equality in the distribution of resources, building classes in comparison to wage increase? And wage increase is an important pillar of social justice. I thought you should have set an example of building classes and other expenses, whether on foreign affairs, defense ministries. So inclusion of wage increase contradicts with the idea of social justice, especially that in the latest budget the wage is really less than 2011. It's now 30% of the budget, though it was 37%. So I think this is really a revealing factor if we want to use this indicator to achieve social justice. I want to ask Dr. Ragi, in all the calculation, I read your excellent study on education. The education spoke about 1 to 7, comparing the highest quintile to the lowest quintile. The richest people, the 15% get 1,000 a month per capita, and 50% get 66 or 660. So some brackets are included because they do deserve income. So for example, the food supplies subsidy goes to the 20%, making up the richest people. I'm talking from a statistical point of view. Sometimes comparisons are unfair because I am including the people getting 1,000 pounds a year who are not poor. So the government depends on this kind of studies. They lift the subsidy out of the 10%, and the consumption of each individual is 1,000 Egyptian pounds. So when we conduct these studies, taking into account this 20%, maybe the result is to lift the subsidy out of the 10%, so the results might be unfair. Final comments from Dr. Meg, Dr. Rogi, and Dr. Mustafa. Why did I choose the example of wages to classrooms, for example? Because from 2011 and 4 years after, the legislators or the cabinet, when we did not have parliament, increased this amount. So this is a decision. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have increased the wages. What I mean is that we have a choice. You are increasing, for example, the wage for public servants, but you're not public the wage of people working in private sectors. If you build better classrooms, all the poor children will benefit. I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying that you increased a certain item with 140 billion before the inflation in 2014. But if someone said that we wanted this amount for building schools, we would say we don't have enough money. So maybe this is not the best example I should have set, but I just try to deliver my message. I do agree with you, and I don't have any further comments. I don't have many comments, but the political dimension is critical, and we should include a dimension on access to authority, the ability to have access to decision makers. You cannot have or realize social justice unless you can have access to the parliament, to the government, to political parties, and so on. Because without this access, we cannot ensure any sustainability. For those interested in social justice, on Thursday at the Faculty of Arts, Cairo University Sociology Department, we have a one-day conference in the guest house in, yes, Cairo University. If you're interested, at 10 o'clock, from 10 o'clock to 3 p.m. I think. Dr. Ragi, I will briefly comment on the 20% who are the richest. The problem here is that we know that those surveys on income and consumption do not reach the 10% we're referring to. They reject participation, and we underestimate their income and consumption. So the median or the average calculated out of the surveys are less than the average of the consumption out of the macro economy. But there are other ways to be used in this survey. For example, the wealth indicator, like the property or the housing level of the family, and this is taken into consideration in DHS and other surveys, not only in income and spending indicators. So the wealth gap might capture the real differences between the highest quintile and the lowest quintile. But maybe we can take into consideration the decile, because this would be more refined or more accurate to reach the top 10 and the bottom 10. But this is a bit controversial. I think we should publish what we have. We should publish the highest percentage and the lowest percentage. I ask the speakers to hold the mic. Crime rates in Egypt represented at certain point 73 point something were imprisoned for committing crimes. And then when we classify these youth according to their age bracket, we would find them young youth. So I officially demanded to know more about this, about the crime rate on an annual basis, and this was not done. So maybe we can include this as one of the weights, regardless of the sensitivity of the issue, but this reflects a dimension of the social justice, especially that many areas referred to by the speakers. Can we include this in the weights, and to what extent, and what are the challenges that we might face in this regard?
There is a public security report, was discontinued for a very long time since Habib al-Adli was minister, and post-revolution. And in April 2011, I raised the issue in the cabinet, and a committee was established that included the Minister of Justice, and we recommended that this report be issued regularly, and that was a cabinet decree, um, and it should be binding. In that year, I got a copy, and this report exceeds 1,000 pages and includes all the details you're referring to. I do not understand why it is not in circulation or that's not being published. Without it, we are not able to do anything that is significant. I hope that since you are in the parliament, can raise the issue. That report used to be annual, and I told them in the parliament that I used to read it even before I became a member of parliament. I requested it, but I asked that the cabinet, the decree be put in place, but I asked for the report to be published or to be produced again. Of course, part of our developments are going to include some of the past publications, and we can also compare between the current parliament and the past parliaments, and also the questionings are conducted in the parliament now and before. All of these points are going to be integrated. 2 years ago, and Dr. Megid is aware of this fact, that that the Observatory for Social Justice is going to issue a report. I agree with you. We're going to change the variables, and the number is going to be really uglier. And this is a fact. We have our indicators, but we have to calculate it properly. But Dr. Megid has done a great job presenting it for the first time. This is his first attempt. We're going to work on developing it further.